Right, so now we're going to talk about how do we solve equations when we have a square. Some things to keep in mind, you will always have two answers because 2 squared will equal 4 and negative 2. So you'll always have that positive and negative. Like I said, you can put the plus minus if you like. All right, so one thing to keep in mind, that the opposite of squaring is to find the square root. So for this, and remember when we solve an equation, what I do to one side, I have to equally do to the other side. So to undo this x squared and get it to just be x, I take the square root. And since I took the square root of x squared, I'm now going to take the square root of 4. And so now I get x equals, and I have to have both the plus and the minus. And the square root of 4 is 2. And either I know that, because I know 2 times 2 will give me 4, or I look at my handy dandy notes, and that first slide we went over, or the second slide, anywhere where it has the list of all perfect squares. And so either we write plus or minus 2, or if we're working in Math Excel, we're writing 2 comma negative 2 or negative 2 comma 2, but making sure that we separate our two answers with a comma. If you're working with a calculator, your calculator buttons, it could just be a button that has the square root on it, and that could be what you're looking for, or you need to hit second. Let's hit a big or here so that you know. You're going to click the second button, and then you're going to click the button which is normally something like x squared, which has the square root above it. Ooh, no, don't go away. Stop it. There we go. Has the square root above it, and then you can type your number. But that's how you get the square root second, and then the x squared button, because it will give you that square root. Yeah, and that's how we use the calculator. Maybe at the end of this video, I'll pull up a calculator and I can show you. All right, so let's get to solving. So again, x squared, to undo it, I'm going to do the square root. I'm going to do the square root. The root and the square go away, so it's just x equals, and then what times itself equals 81. I'm going to go ahead and put my plus and minus here. 9 times itself, or 9 squared, equals 81. And so I know that my answer is plus or minus 9. Again, you are more than welcome to use that sheet of perfect squares that we did at the beginning. So again here, to get rid of the square, I'm going to square root, and what I do to one side, I have to do the other. So that takes care of the square, and I'm left with just c. And then the square root of 49 is going to be plus or minus, or again, the positive and the negative. And then I asked myself what times itself is 49, and the answer is 7. And so it's plus or minus 7, or 7 comma negative 7, or negative 7 comma 7. However you're going to type it in or need to type it in. All right, and then last but not least, a squared equals 16. We're going to take the square root of both sides because that gets rid of the square with the a. And so a will equal, and positive negative 4 times 4 is 16. And so that's how that works. What times itself is 16? 4. 4 times 4 is 16. And you just have to remember to put a plus or minus, or to have the positive comma the negative of that answer. And I'm telling you, do not forget to have that comma when you go to answer, and it will say in blue. If you haven't been reading any of the blue in Math Excel, you need to. It's going to give you hints like that, like make sure to put a comma for multiple answers, that type of stuff. All right, so now we have fractions here, and we're like, oh my goodness, Miss Cartwright, seriously, fractions? All right, they're really not that hard. We're going to take the square root of both, and that gives me just an A. Now, when I take the square root of the fraction, I'm actually going to take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. And so then I know that 8 times 8 gives us 64. So we have an 8 for my numerator because the square root of 64 is 8. And that 9 times 9 is 81. So the square root of 81 is 9. And then again, we just put a plus or minus in front of it, or 8/9, comma, -8/9, right? But that's our answer. All right, now for this one, we have that mixed number. Now, for a mixed number, what we need to do is we need to make it an improper fraction. Excuse me. I can't take the square root of the whole number and then the square root of each, the numerator and the denominator. It's not going to work. So to make a mixed number into a fraction, we're going to multiply denominator times the whole number and then add the numerator. So our w squared is going to be equal to 25 times 10 is 250. And then we're going to do plus 6. And so we end up with 256 as our numerator. Now, you may say, Mrs. Cartwright, we topped out at 15 squared, which was 225. I went and changed a page and looked at the wrong one. 225. We don't have 256 in our list. Well, that's okay. We didn't list all infinite squares that could be, or perfect squares. We just listed up to 15. And so this tells us it's greater than 15. So I'm going to take the square root of both. And what that means is I'm going to take the square root of 256 and the square root of 25. And you may go, well, I know the bottom one is 5, but I don't know the top one. Well, 256 is not too far from 225. And so that tells me that it's probably 16. But let's go to a calculator. At the Desmos calculator on my Canvas page, and if you notice, the Desmos one has the square root right here. So I'm just going to click square root, and we're going to type in 256, and our answer is 16. So that is what is on top, 16. And so then we have plus or minus 16/5, or if you want to make it into a mixed number again, or if Math Excel says mixed number answer, then what we're going to do is, okay, how many times does 5 divide into 15? It divides in 3 times. Don't forget our plus or minus in the front. And then 5 times 3 is 15. So 16 minus 15 is 1. And so we end up with 3 1/5. So again, I asked myself, how many times, right? We've talked about this before. Top number goes in, bottom number goes to the outside. We said that 5 goes into 16 3 times, which is 15, leaves us with 1. That's how I got the 1/5, in case you're like, I still don't know how you got that, Mrs. Cartwright. There it is. That's how I got it. We have one last example, and it's a word problem. So a company makes small custom design stamps that have a square image. So if we're talking about a square, right, that's helping us imagine what we're looking at. The image area has an area of 1,200 millimeters squared. What is the exact length of one side of the image? So we just have to keep in mind, we're talking about a square shape and we're wanting area. Those are some key words. So we have to remember that area for a square is area equals side length squared, right? And so I know that my area is 1,200. So I can replace the A with 1,200 equals S squared. And that's what I'm wanting to find is uh, excuse me, side length. And so I'm going to take the square root. Now it talks about exact length. And when it talks about exact, if this is not a perfect square, then our exact length is plus or minus the square root of what's inside. Because we had a brief talk about rational and irrational numbers, and that if it's not a perfect square, then the decimal never ends. And so you can't get an exact length if you round your decimal. You can only get an approximation. This is an exact length. Now I went ahead and put plus or minus, but that was silly of Mrs. Cartwright because you can't have a negative side length to something. And so it really would only be the positive because only a positive makes sense. Negative doesn't make sense in this case. Now it says approximate it to the nearest tenth of a millimeter. So we're going to go back to that calculator and type into my calculator square root, oops, I forgot to clear, silly Mrs. Cartwright, square root of 1,200. And so here we have, and it said nearest tenth, so this is where I'm wanting, and so I look at the digit behind it, it's a 4, and so 5 or above we give it a shove, 4 or below we let it lie low. And so we're going to keep our answer at 34.6. And so that's what we're going to write here. 34.6 millimeters. And that's our side length. Now, again, only positives make sense in this case, and the negatives do not. So that is how we solve equations using square roots. And if it's just an equation, you want a plus or a minus. If it has real world application, so like a word problem, you have to ask yourself, would a negative make sense in this case? Most of the time, it doesn't. But you got to look at it. All right? Until next time, 8th graders, peace out.